Welcome back to The Explainer. Today is the 30th of June 2026, and we are diving into something really special. We're unpacking a framework that genuinely bridges the gap between clinical psychology and existential philosophy. We're looking at some absolutely mind-bending concepts from a creator named Yasminn over on her channel just to see what happens.
Right, and the way we're tackling this today is through a deep dive debate. We're looking at two totally distinct, almost opposing ways of viewing human evolution. On one hand, you've got this very grounded, psychological lens. On the other, a much more expansive, spiritual perspective. But the fascinating thing is that they both converge on one incredibly powerful theme, the evolution of the self, all viewed through the metaphor of the game of life.
Exactly. We're going to break down how we transition from just existing, being passive participants in this game, to actively designing it.
So think about this for a second. What if life isn't happening to you, but is actually just waiting for you to play? It completely flips our standard worldview on its head. Instead of framing life as this series of random, chaotic punishments that we just have to grit our teeth and endure, this framework proposes that reality is actually a deliberate, cosmic laboratory.
Yeah, it means the obstacles aren't roadblocks at all. They are the curriculum. But, to understand how to actually play this game, we first have to figure out why so many of us are currently losing.
Which brings us to phase one of Yasminn's framework, the default loop.
So most people operate entirely as unconscious participants, right? I mean, you see it all the time. You change the job, you move to a completely new city, you get into a new relationship, but somehow you end up with the exact same flavor of frustration. From a clinical psychology standpoint, Sigmund Freud actually called this repetition compulsion. It's our brain's unconscious tendency to recreate unresolved emotional wounds. It's a brand new scene, sure, but it brings up the exact same feeling.
Absolutely, but here's where it gets wild. The spiritual framework has been describing this exact same phenomenon for literally thousands of years. It's the ancient Eastern concept of samsara, the continuous looping cycle of suffering caused by unconscious attachment. So both sides of our debate completely agree on this one core truth. Until you wake up and become conscious of the game's mechanics, you are literally doomed to repeat the loop.
And this right here is where the real friction lies. Playing by default means you're just reacting. If we pull in philosopher Jacques Lacan, he'd argue you're basically just chasing desires that were programmed into you by society. You're acting as an NPC, a non-playable character in someone else's simulation.
Right, but playing by design, that requires a fundamental shift in the actual mechanics of how you live. Grounding this in Dr. Joe Dispenza's neuroscience, we know that life responds to who you are, not just what you want. You simply cannot enter the next level of the game if you're operating on the energy of your current level. You literally have to change your inner state to match the new environment.
So the big question is, what actually forces us to make that change? That brings us to section 2, the curriculum of chaos. Okay, so if you refuse to evolve and you're just desperately clinging to your default programming, the game doesn't just let you sit there. It initiates a sequence to force your hand, and the escalation is highly systematic. First, it starts with a subtle discomfort, just a strange sort of déjà vu that something isn't quite right. But, you ignore it.
We all do.
Right. So then comes step 2, repeating patterns. The exact same lesson shows up, just wearing a new face, but you still resist, because biologically speaking, we humans usually prefer the painful discomfort we know over the massive transformation we don't. It's safe. So what does the game do? It brings in step 3, absolute chaos. The walls of your comfort zone completely collapse until you are left with absolutely no choice but to move.
And you have to remember this, the game doesn't want you to be stuck. It will make hell out of your comfort zone so you can finally move. This is such a massive perspective shift. Chaos is not a punishment. Those obstacles, they are actually invitations for play. The universe is practically demanding your evolution to the next level, and it will apply whatever friction is absolutely necessary to get you there.
Which leads us beautifully into part 3, curiosity as the catalyst.
Think about our default programming for a second. When things go wrong, what's the very first thing we do? We ruminate. We waste all of our precious life force on these endless what-ifs. Our breath gets shallow and we get trapped in pure survival mode, just endlessly replaying a game that is already over. But what happens if we replace that rumination with reflection?
It changes everything.
Exactly. Reflection is fueled by curiosity. It's gathering data. It's investigating your internal state and gaining absolute clarity for your next move. It takes all that paralyzing anxiety and transmutes it into liberating forward momentum.
And I want to stress, this isn't just nice-sounding spiritual poetry, this is hard science.
There's a fascinating UC Berkeley study that actually found people with higher natural curiosity literally have less inflammation in their bodies. No joke. They showed significantly lower levels of C-reactive protein, which is a major biological marker for chronic stress. When you just pause for a second and ask, I wonder why this feels so tense, you biologically shift your nervous system entirely out of fight or flight and into exploration mode. Curiosity acts as a literal biological reset button. And from the spiritual side of the debate, that exact same curiosity acts as a solvent. It flexes and dissolves the ego. See, the ego demands certainty, right? It wants this rigid, easily definable identity. But when you step into the persona of the mad scientist, when you treat your life as your own personal, open-ended lab, you loosen that rigid grip. Your energy is finally able to flow without resistance. This stance actually becomes a spiritual shield against the harshness of life. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start saying, wow, what a fascinating experiment to observe.
So how do we actually apply this in our daily lives? Let's look at the 2 rules for active play. There are exactly 2 fundamental rules you need to master in this cosmic laboratory to bridge that gap between our ancient biology and our spiritual potential.
Rule number 1, track your wins. Guys, this is a biological necessity. Our nervous systems were built for ancient survival on the savannah, meaning we are wired to prioritize threats way over successes. We all have this built-in negativity bias. If you don't actively track your wins, your brain will literally delete your history of success just to protect you from future disappointment. It's crazy. By physically writing down your wins, you perform a conscious memory correction. You build this stable, calm confidence by giving yourself internal data that proves, hey, I am absolutely capable of handling the next level.
And then we have rule number 2, learn from your losses. Yasminn shared this incredible anecdote in her explainer about losing a big business deal. She was devastated, but a friend replied to her, "That's amazing. That's one less way to get it wrong." I mean, what a reframe. Think of master chess players, like the ones you see in the Queen's Gambit. When they lose a match, they don't attach their entire identity to that failure. They don't say, "I'm a total failure." They simply document the error, absorb the new data, and move on to the next game. You have to honor your loss enough to extract the lesson, but without ever letting that loss become your permanent home.
Which really highlights the ultimate paradigm shift here. The victim mindset is entirely passive. It gets defensive and asks, why is this happening to me?
Exactly.
While the player mindset, on the other hand, asks, what is this preparing me for? When you track your wins and you analytically decode your losses, every single dead end ceases to be a failure. Instead, it just becomes precise data, guiding you toward better alignment. You're no longer just reacting to the simulation, you are actively playing the game.
And that brings us to the final phase, playing by design.
To fully grasp the climax of this entire framework, we have to look to the ancient Hindu concept of Leela. Leela proposes that the entire universe is a divine game. It is the spontaneous, creative pulse of an infinite source that is so incredibly whole and complete, the only thing left for it to do is explore itself. It's literally a cosmic game of hide and seek. The universe pretends to be limited. It pretends to be you, facing your specific obstacles and bills and heartbreaks, just to see what happens. You are the universe, actively exploring its own possibilities.
Which means we absolutely have to stop waiting for the struggle to end before we allow ourselves to be happy. The juice of life isn't hidden away at the finish line. The mundane struggles, the daily frustrations, the massive obstacles, they aren't interruptions to your life. They are the game.
I completely agree. Solving is the dance. Solving is the game. When you start treating every choice as a testable variable, and you savor those obstacles with the curiosity of a scientist or even a child, you actually find effortless ease right smack in the middle of the chaos.
So if fear isn't a stop sign but is actually a GPS coordinate showing you exactly where the edge of your current map is, the question becomes, what is your fear asking you to explore next? The next level is waiting for you to step up. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.
Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.
Did you know that human neurochemistry is literally designed to prefer predictable misery over unpredictable joy?
I mean, it sounds completely backward when you say it out loud, but yeah, biologically speaking, it's true.
Right, because your brain, sitting there in the dark of your skull, is essentially just this hyper-advanced prediction machine. It's constantly calculating probabilities just to keep you alive.
Exactly. And from a pure, survival standpoint, A familiar toxic relationship or a really soul-crushing job is a known variable.
Yeah, your brain knows exactly how much cortisol to pump out for that. It knows the exact parameters of the threat.
But joy, or like a sudden positive transformation, stepping into a completely new life, that represents a massive unknown variable.
And to the primitive parts of our brains, the unknown is mathematically indistinguishable from death.
Which is just the ultimate evolutionary trap, really. We are biologically wired to calcify around our own wounds simply because, well, we survived them yesterday.
We mistake the familiar for the safe.
Right, and because of that neurological glitch, we end up living our lives on a loop. We repeat the exact same painful lessons, just with different people or in different cities.
Always wondering why the scenery changes, but the frustration feels identical.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. It is Tuesday, June 30, 2026.
And today we are going entirely laser-focused on a single mind-bending theme, the evolution of the self.
We are going to explore the mechanics of how we transition from living life on autopilot, what we're calling playing by default, to consciously shaping our reality, which we're calling playing by design.
And we are decoding all of this through this really fascinating framework called the game of life.
Our sources today are drawn from the philosophical, psychological, and spiritual inquiries of a creator named Yasminn. This is all from her YouTube channel, just to see what happens.
Her work is honestly such a fascinating synthesis. She pulls from an incredibly wide net.
Yeah, she really does. We're talking classical psychoanalysis, the rigid empiricism of modern neuroscience, ancient Hindu philosophy, and even like behavioral economics. So our mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct how this so-called game actually operates underneath the hood. We want to understand those invisible rules.
And the biological and psychological reasons we keep getting stuck on certain levels, plus the exact mechanism that allows us to break the loop and evolve.
So, to you listening right now, if you have ever felt like you are stuck fighting the exact same boss in the video game of life, just with a different skin,
well, consider this the ultimate strategy guide to your own existence. Let's just start with the architecture itself.
Good place to start. The core premise Yasminn presents is that life is not just a series of random, chaotic events colliding with each other.
Right. It is a highly structured system, and it has specific levels, and each level comes with its own unique curriculum.
That curriculum aspect is crucial, I think. The framework suggests that the universe, or the system of life, isn't actually interested in your comfort.
It doesn't care if you're cozy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is exclusively interested in your evolution, and the most fundamental rule of this game is that time does not equal progress.
Oh, man. That completely upends the traditional Western narrative of growing up, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
We culturally assume that maturation is just this passive process.
Right. Like you go to school, you put in the hours, you get older, and life just sort of unfolds and hands you the rewards for the next stage.
But if we view life as a structured game, the game doesn't care if you're 25 or 65. It only cares if you've learned the specific lesson coded into your current environment.
And the game is notoriously patient. At first, it just gives you these, like, gentle taps.
Yeah, and those gentle taps usually manifest as this subtle, almost imperceptible internal friction.
Like a lingering sense of boredom that you just can't shake.
Or a strange sense of déjà vu, like when you're having a conversation with a new colleague and you suddenly realize, wait, this is the exact same dynamic I had with a toxic roommate a decade ago.
Oh, wow. Yes. That is the system whispering to you. It's trying to bring your attention to an unresolved pattern.
But the default human response is to just completely ignore it.
We don't just ignore it, though, do we? We actively sedate it. We flood our dopamine receptors.
Right. We pick up our phones and scroll for 3 hours, or we buy something on Amazon.
We pour a drink. We basically do everything in our power to avoid sitting in the silence of that subtle discomfort.
And because the unnegotiable goal of the game is your evolution, if you ignore the gentle taps, the system escalates.
The friction increases.
Exactly. That subtle boredom turns into acute distress. The minor misunderstandings turn into massive destabilizing conflicts.
So if you refuse to learn the lesson when it's just presented as a whisper, life will eventually scream at you in the form of absolute chaos.
Life will actively dismantle your comfort zone if you refuse to leave it voluntarily.
This universal loop, this idea of repeating the same mistakes until chaos forces us to change, it isn't just a modern self-help concept, right?
Not at all. The sources draw this massive line connecting the idea across completely different epochs and disciplines. Freud actually called it repetition compulsion.
Right, Sigmund Freud. He observed this phenomenon in his clinical practice over a century ago.
Yeah, he noticed that trauma survivors didn't just remember their trauma. They actively and completely unconsciously arranged their present lives to recreate the exact conditions of their original wounding.
Which is wild. So a person who grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent will, like, unconsciously seek out emotionally unavailable partners.
Exactly. They're setting up the board to play the exact same losing game over and over again.
But from a logical standpoint, I mean, that sounds like pure masochism. Why would the human psyche actively seek out the very thing that destroyed it?
Well, Freud theorized that the unconscious mind isn't actually trying to punish you. It's trying to master the trauma.
Oh, I see. So the psyche brings the unresolved issue to the surface, creating a new theater with new actors.
Hoping that, this time you will make a different choice. It wants a different ending to the play.
But if you are playing by default, operating strictly on your conditioned reflexes, you don't make a different choice.
Yeah.
You just react the same way.
And the trauma is compounded. You're trapped in the loop.
It's the psychological equivalent of just spinning your wheels in the mud. And when Yasminn's sources cross-reference this with Eastern philosophy, the parallels are pretty staggering.
Oh, completely. We see the exact same architecture described in the concept of samsara.
Right, samsara, which is foundational to Hindu and Buddhist thought.
Yeah, it translates roughly to continuous flow or wandering. But it specifically refers to the cycle of aimless, drifting, wandering, and mundane existence fueled by ignorance and unconscious attachment.
It is the cycle of suffering.
And the philosophical argument there is that we relive the same spiritual and emotional wounds, whether across multiple lifetimes or just repeatedly within a single decade of this lifetime, until we finally cultivate the awareness to perceive the pattern.
So in both of these frameworks, the suffering isn't some sort of cosmic punishment.
No, not at all. The universe isn't sitting up there with a clipboard deducting points for bad behavior.
The suffering is a structural mechanism.
Yeah.
It's literally an alarm clock designed to wake you up.
Exactly.
But this brings me to a massive contradiction in human behavior. Let's look at the player in a video game who keeps throwing their character at a boss fight using a low-level weapon.
Right. They get crushed, they respawn, and they run right back in.
And get crushed again. They absolutely refuse to pause the main quest, go do the side quests, gather the experience points, and level up their armor.
It's frustrating to watch, yeah.
So if the loop is so acutely painful, why do our brains actively, aggressively fight the level up?
Well, we really have to look at the biology of the comfort zone to understand that resistance. It goes back to that neurobiological fact about predictability we mentioned earlier.
The prediction machine.
Right. The brain's predictive processing models view the known as safe, regardless of how objectively terrible that known is.
So the ego, which is essentially the psychological manifestation of our biological survival drive, does not optimize for happiness or fulfillment.
Not even a little bit. It does not care about your self-actualization. It optimizes strictly for survival.
So the ego is basically a hyper-vigilant security guard that has been locked in a bunker since the Paleolithic era.
That is an incredibly accurate description, honestly. The ego evolved in an environment where any sudden change usually meant a predator was nearby.
Right. If you know that a tiger lives in the cave on the left, you don't go exploring the cave on the left. The known threat is manageable.
Therefore, if you are in a deeply unfulfilling marriage or a career that is actively destroying your mental health, your ego analyzes the situation and concludes,
This is miserable, yes, but we are currently breathing.
exactly. We know the exact dimensions of this misery. We know how to survive it.
So any change, even a change toward a demonstrably better life, represents a break in the predictive model.
Yes, stepping into a dream scenario like launching the business you always wanted, finding a genuinely healthy partner that requires abandoning the old predictive model.
And to the primitive brain, abandoning the model is a literal threat to its existence.
The ego views a level up not as an achievement, but as a death of the current self. It realizes that the version of you that survived the trauma is no longer needed in this new environment.
So it will fight tooth and nail to prevent its own obsolescence.
It absolutely will, which explains the phenomenon of self-sabotage perfectly.
We get exactly what we want and then we blow it up because the nervous system literally cannot handle the unfamiliar frequency of peace.
Because to that Paleolithic security guard, the absence of chaos feels like a trap. The silence is terrifying.
Wow. And the sources discuss this in the context of modern society, which has practically industrialized the avoidance of this silence.
Oh, society's architecture is perfectly designed to keep us trapped in the default loop. We are constantly offered these socially acceptable ways to numb the friction of the game.
The sources reference Aldous Huxley's Brave New World here, right?
Yes. In that dystopian vision, the population isn't controlled by a totalitarian military state or by book burnings or fear.
They're controlled by Soma.
Exactly. Soma is this widely available state-sponsored narcotic that keeps everyone perfectly, comfortably numb.
So whenever someone feels the slightest hint of existential dread or psychological friction, they just pop a Soma.
And the desire to evolve or rebel completely evaporates. Today, our Soma is algorithmic.
It's the endless feed, the constant outrage cycle, the hyper-availability of digital distraction.
When the gentle taps of the game start creating friction, instead of sitting in the discomfort and asking what we need to learn, we just sedate ourselves.
We treat the symptom of the friction while entirely ignoring the disease of our own stagnation.
And this brings us to the critical threshold of the framework. If we are biologically wired to resist the unknown and societally conditioned to distract ourselves, how do we ever initiate movement?
How do we actually transition to playing by design?
Well, the foundational rule here is that moving to the next level requires a complete dissolution of the current self. The game explicitly denies entry to your old identity.
And the most frustrating part of that transition is that the next level does not wait for you to be ready.
Ready is one of the most dangerous illusions in the human lexicon.
Really? How so?
Because it is a static, idealized state that perfectionists use as a sophisticated form of procrastination. The universe is entirely dynamic. It is in constant motion.
So the next level of your life is not a waiting room.
No, it is a frequency. It is simply waiting for you to match its resonance. You cannot force your way into it through sheer willpower or logic.
You enter it by literally becoming the version of yourself that the level requires.
Exactly. But the unnegotiable law of the system is movement. The universe is inherently expansive. So if we are part of that system, we must expand.
And if we refuse to move by conscious choice, life will force the movement through chaos.
Which accounts for the radical discrepancy in how different people level up. You have one demographic of players who cultivate immense self-awareness.
They feel the subtle friction, they recognize the gentle taps, and they consciously choose to step into the terror of the unknown.
Right. They initiate the breakup, they quit the secure job, they move across the country, they take the leap of faith.
Then you have the other demographic, which is, frankly, most of us for most of our lives. We try to negotiate with the mechanics of the game.
We tell the universe, I will definitely learn this lesson and change my life, but I'm going to wait until my savings account hits a certain number.
Or I'll do it when the kids are older. I'll do it when I have a 100% guarantee that the leap will be successful.
But the game operates completely outside of human timelines and negotiations. If you overstay your welcome in a comfort zone that you have outgrown, the friction will inevitably reach a critical mass.
And the system will violently push you out to ensure your expansion.
You will be suddenly fired, the partner will leave you out of the blue, a health crisis will emerge.
Okay, let me challenge the framing of this for a moment.
Go ahead.
Is this chaos actually a systemic failsafe built into the architecture of the game to prevent stagnation? Or is it simply the natural consequence, like the equivalent of an eviction notice? From a comfort zone we've completely overstayed.
That's a great question.
Because if we follow this logic all the way down, it implies that suffering is entirely optional. And that feels almost insulting to anyone going through a severe tragedy.
I agree. That is the razor's edge of this entire philosophy, and it requires profound nuance. The sources do not claim that pain is optional.
Pain is a biological and physical reality.
Exactly. Loss is a mathematical certainty in a finite universe. Grief is just the natural consequence of love.
Okay, so where does the optional suffering come in?
Well, the suffering defined here as the prolonged cyclical psychological agony that comes from resisting reality, from fighting the lesson, from clinging to an identity that is no longer viable, that is what is optional.
I see.
The chaos acts as an eviction notice precisely because it is a systemic failsafe.
Yeah.
If the underlying physics of the universe demand evolution, a static object will eventually be crushed by the pressure of that expansion.
The chaos shatters the obsolete structure so the new one has room to be built.
Exactly. So the goal is to navigate the map without waiting for the eviction notice. The goal is to move by choice.
And the sources offer a fascinating tool for this. They completely reframe the concept of fear. They suggest that fear is not a biological stop sign, it is a compass.
Which is a radical cognitive reframe. Because when we feel fear, our biological hardware initiates the sympathetic nervous system.
Right. The heart rate spikes, the pupils dilate, blood rushes to our extremities.
We are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. And we interpret this physiological cascade as an urgent mandate to run away or to freeze in place.
But within the game of life framework, if you are experiencing a massive, dense block of anxiety regarding a potential evolutionary move like setting a firm boundary with a toxic family member, or maybe exposing your creative work to the public,
that fear is not an obstacle blocking your path. It is a coordinate on the map.
it is the GPS leading you to the exact door you have to walk through to exit the current level.
Because the fear is the empirical evidence that you have finally reached the outer perimeter of your known reality. You are standing exactly at the border.
The fear signifies that a larger, unknown reality is waiting on the other side.
And if you want to evolve, you do not wait for the fear to dissipate. Courage, in this model, has absolutely nothing to do with the absence of fear.
Courage is the intellectual recognition that the fear itself is the invitation to play the next level.
Yes, that reframes anxiety from a pathology into a profound spiritual indicator.
But there is a deeper layer to this transition. How do we actually match the frequency of the next level?
Well, the sources bring in the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza alongside Plato's allegory of the cave to explain this mechanic.
Let's start with Dispenza. His work bridges quantum physics, neuroscience, and philosophy. Right.
Yes, his central thesis is that your inner state, the specific neurochemical cocktail generated by your dominant thoughts, beliefs, and emotions, literally projects and shapes your external reality.
So the crucial psychological insight here is that the system of life does not respond to what you want. It responds exclusively to who you are. Let me make sure I understand the mechanics of that. If my goal is to reach level 5, let's say level 5 represents a life of financial abundance and deep, secure relationships, but my internal emotional baseline is still vibrating with the scarcity, fear, and insecurity of level 2.
The game will ignore your conscious desires. It will simply keep rendering level 2 experiences for you.
Because the system is just a mirror reflecting my dominant frequency.
Right. If you are operating from the energy of lack, you will continue to attract circumstances that validate that lack. The brain's reticular activating system will literally filter out opportunities for abundance because they don't match your internal blueprint.
So you have to embody the emotional signature of the next level before the external environment physically manifests it.
You have to literally rehearse the neurochemistry of your next level self.
And this leads perfectly into the philosophical foundation of Plato's allegory of the cave. Because shifting that internal frequency requires waking up to the fact that your current reality might just be an illusion.
Yeah, Plato's allegory is perhaps the most famous metaphor for the evolution of awareness in human history.
For anyone who needs a refresher, in the allegory, you have prisoners who have been chained inside a dark cave since birth.
And they are chained in such a way that they can only face a blank wall. Behind them, there is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, a parade of objects is carried back and forth.
The prisoners watch the shadows of these objects projected onto the wall. And because it is the only reality they have ever known, they believe the shadows are the absolute empirical truth of the universe.
The shadows are their entire map of reality.
Until one prisoner manages to break the chains. He turns around.
He is initially blinded by the fire, but he realizes the shadows were just two-dimensional projections. He then navigates out of the cave entirely into the blinding light of the sun and sees the true multidimensional world.
When his eyes adjust, his paradigm is completely shattered.
But the critical detail that Yasminn's sources highlight is this. When the prisoner achieves this enlightenment, the game itself does not end.
Right, the physical world continues. The shadows back in the cave don't just disappear.
The environment didn't change. His awareness of the system changed. He saw the source code.
So seeing the shadows for what they are doesn't teleport you out of the game of life. It fundamentally alters how you interact with it.
You no longer react blindly to the projections on the wall. You stop being a victim of circumstance operating on default, and you begin making conscious, sovereign choices based on a higher truth.
You transition from playing by default to playing by design.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the most actionable and arguably the most difficult part of this deep dive, transitioning to playing by design, or what the sources call breaking character.
If we realize we are in the cave and we want to redesign our reality, how do we practically shed our old skin?
The foundational hurdle here is the terrifying realization that the self you currently identify with, your personality, your desires, your fears, isn't inherently you.
And this is a highly destabilizing concept. Human beings are fiercely, violently attached to their identities.
But the sources lean heavily into psychoanalysis here, specifically Jacques Lacan's concept of the big other, to explain that your current character is just a fabricated construct.
Yeah, break down Lacan's other for us, because this is where the psychology gets really dense.
So Lacan argued that the human ego is formed during what he called the mirror stage in infancy. When a child sees their reflection, they recognize themselves as a cohesive whole for the first time, but that image is external to them.
So from that point on, our identity is constructed from the outside in.
Exactly. The other represents the symbolic order of society, the language, the laws, the expectations of our parents, our culture, the media.
And Lacan's radical assertion is that man's desire is the desire of the other.
Meaning the things I think I want deeply and authentically aren't actually my original desires.
I want the prestigious promotion or the massive house in the suburbs or the specific type of romantic partner because the other, my parents, Hollywood capitalism, programmed me to believe that those specific markers equate to winning the game.
You are essentially playing a game that was coded by someone else, using desires that were implanted in you before you even had the cognitive defense mechanisms to question them.
Your current personality is largely a collection of trauma responses and survival tactics adopted in childhood to secure love and safety from the other.
It's like we are wearing a highly sophisticated exoskeleton. We forged this armor in childhood to survive our environment. It protected us.
But now we are trying to climb a mountain, and this incredibly heavy armor is exhausting us.
To play by design, we have to recognize that we are not the armor. We have to take it off. We have to, as the sources call it, break character.
And breaking character requires empirical action. The sources provide strict, actionable rules for hacking your own system.
Rule 1 is to relentlessly track your wins. And it's critical to understand that this is not about manifesting or toxic positivity, right?
No, it is a neurobiological necessity. This goes back to the evolutionary biology we discussed at the top, the negativity bias.
Our ancient hardware is explicitly designed to remember the rustle in the bushes that might be a predator, while completely ignoring the beautiful sunset.
We are wired to filter out our successes because, from a Darwinian perspective, feeling immense joy and accomplishment didn't keep our ancestors alive. Being paranoid, anxious, and hypervigilant did.
So if you are attempting to break character and step into the unknown, but you rely solely on your brain's default memory storage,
you are playing the game with corrupted data. You will look at your past and only see the failures, the rejections, and the dangers.
You will inherently feel like an imposter who is entirely unequipped for the next level.
Tracking your wins, literally writing them down in a notebook or a file on your phone, is an act of conscious memory correction. You are manually overwriting the ancient hardware.
The host in Yasminn's source material talks about keeping a specific proof that I can make it know on her phone.
Yes. Whenever her brain attempts to delete her history of success to protect her from the risk of future disappointment, she forces herself to read the note.
It builds the scaffolding required to step up. You cannot take a leap of faith if your internal database is telling you that your legs don't work.
It provides the vital, empirical internal data to back up your ambition, which leads directly to Rule 2, which is equally critical but much harder to execute.
You must learn from your losses.
But the sources draw a massive, bright line between reflection and rumination.
The Queen's Gambit analogy in the material was brilliant for illustrating this difference. Let's break that down.
When an average chess player suffers a devastating loss, they immediately enter a state of rumination.
Right. They replay the final few moves of the board 1,000 times in their heads, obsessing over the what-ifs.
They torture themselves trying to retroactively solve a version of reality that has already collapsed.
Rumination is attempting to win a game that is already over. And the biological cost of that is immense, isn't it?
It is. When you ruminate on a failure, your brain doesn't know the difference between the memory and the present moment. It signals the body to enter a state of acute stress.
Your breathing becomes shallow, your chest tightens, cortisol floods the system.
In that biological survival mode, your perception physically narrows. You literally cannot learn the lesson of the loss because your brain is just trying to survive the memory of it.
But look at grandmasters, or characters like Beth Harmon in The Queen's Gambit. They practice reflection.
When she loses, she doesn't drown in the emotional humiliation of the defeat. She immediately resets the board.
She objectively analyzes the architecture of the game, identifies the precise tactical error, extracts the data, and integrates it.
Reflection asks objective questions. Was I rushing? Did I ignore my intuition on move 12? with my internal state agitated before the game even started?
Reflection treats the loss as a data acquisition event for the next move.
Exactly.
But wait, if we apply this to the incredibly heavy, devastating losses in real life, the collapse of a 10-year marriage, the bankruptcy of a business you poured your soul into, the sudden loss of a career, isn't there a massive danger in just treating these deeply human tragedies as mere game data?
That's a very fair point.
If we just analyze the board and extract the data, don't we run the risk of bypassing the actual grief? I mean, we aren't robots.
That is a phenomenal pushback, and it highlights a critical tension in this entire philosophy. We have to be very careful here.
Right.
The goal of this framework is absolutely not emotional numbness. It is not about adopting a sociopathic detachment where you become completely insulated from human pain.
So what's the distinction?
The distinction lies in separating your identity from the failure.
Okay, unpack that. How do we separate identity from failure without just burying the emotion?
Feeling the crushing grief of a collapsed marriage or a failed business is profoundly human, and it must be processed. But believing that you are fundamentally unlovable because the marriage ended?
Or believing that you are inherently a failure because the business went bankrupt?
That is where the ego traps you in the cave. When you allow a circumstantial loss to metastasize into your core identity, you cease to be a player in the game, and you become a victim of it.
And a victim loses their agency, they lose their curiosity.
Exactly. A player feels the agonizing sting of defeat, allows the grief to move through their nervous system, but ultimately retains their core sovereignty.
They eventually look at the wreckage and say, okay, that strategy was flawed. That was one less way to get it right. What did the system just teach me?
Protecting your core worth from the external volatility of the game is the only thing that allows you to keep playing.
And that resilience is what enables the next step, which is breaking character.
The sources argue that to glitch the predictive algorithms of your brain, you have to actively take actions that your old identity would never take.
So if your constructed character is the peacemaker who always stays quiet in meetings to avoid conflict, you have to force yourself to speak up and disagree.
Or if your character is the hyper-independent survivor who never asks for help, you have to initiate a conversation where you explicitly ask to be supported.
You have to intentionally glitch your own system to prove to your amygdala that you will not die if you violate the old scripts.
You are gathering real-time, empirical evidence that contradicts the limiting stories of the other. You are building a new self-concept through action, not just thought.
Now, I noticed a very specific semantic distinction in the sources regarding how we adopt this new character.
Oh, about faking it.
Yeah, we have all been fed the corporate self-help mantra of fake it till you make it. But Yasminn suggests a totally different paradigm. Play with it until you become it.
Why is that shift in language so important?
Well, language dictates perception. Fake it till you make it implies a rigid, deceptive, and fixed outcome. It breeds imposter syndrome.
It feels like you are wearing a mask to trick the system, and it is inherently tied to a deep anxiety about being found out. It is outcome obsessed.
It operates on the frequency of lack. It acknowledges that you don't have the thing, so you have to lie about it.
Precisely. Play with it until you become... It operates on a completely different frequency.
Yeah.
It is fluid. It is rooted in non-attachment and curiosity.
Think about how a child plays dress-up. They put on a superhero cape, not to deceive their parents into thinking they can actually fly, but simply to see how the energy of the cape feels.
You are trying on a new energy, a new set of behaviors, to see how it resonates with your nervous system.
If it aligns with your authentic self, you integrate it. If it feels restrictive or false, you discard it without any sense of failure.
Which brings us to the most powerful engine of this entire philosophical framework. Section 4, the ultimate cheat code. Curiosity as the engine of free will.
If we view life as an ongoing cosmic experiment, curiosity is the essential tool.
It is the only bridge that successfully transports us from the victim mindset, which constantly asks the universe, why is this happening to me?
To the player mindset, which asks, what is this preparing me for?
Curiosity is the antidote to judgment. When you face life with the mindset of a scientist in a laboratory, every single choice, every interaction, and every failure becomes a variable you can test.
It ceases to be a life or death commitment that you are eternally bound to.
You start bracing against the friction of reality, and you start actively observing it.
Let's bring in the profound Hindu concepts that the sources reference, because they completely reframe the foundational why of our existence. I want to talk about Leela and Ananda.
These are staggering philosophical concepts that completely alter the lens of the game of life. Let's start with Ananda.
Yeah.
In Vedic philosophy, Ananda translates to a state of pure, limitless, unadulterated bliss. It is the concept of the source code of the universe, or God, or infinite consciousness, existing in a state of total perfection and wholeness.
It lacks nothing. It needs nothing.
Right.
So the obvious logical question is, if the foundational source of the universe is already perfectly whole, complete, and blissful, why would it ever create this incredibly messy, painful, friction-filled, chaotic reality that we live in?
That paradox is answered by the concept of Leela. Leela translates directly to divine play or sport.
So the philosophical argument is that the universe did not create this reality out of necessity, or out of a desire to fix a flaw, or out of lack.
It created this reality out of an overflow of creative joy. It was created for amusement, for expression, just to see what happens.
It's the ultimate cosmic game of hide and seek. The universe essentially fragmented itself, placed limitations on its infinite nature, and squeezed itself into these tiny, dense, biological human forms. You, me, everyone listening.
Just so it could experience the thrill of exploring its own infinite possibilities from a localized perspective.
In this framework, we are not separate from the universe. We are literally the universe experiencing itself in real time.
And if you can truly internalize that perspective, the crushing heaviness of the world begins to lose its grip on your psyche.
The obstacles, the friction, the terrible bosses, the heartbreaks, they aren't systemic errors designed to punish you.
No, they are the very terrain where the universe is exploring its own limits through your specific unique vantage point. The problem isn't blocking the path. The problem is the dance.
But hold on, if we look at life purely as a cosmic experiment or divine play, if we treat our crushing human experiences with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction in a beaker.
Don't we run the massive risk of breeding apathy?
Yeah, exactly. If everything is just the universe playing a game with itself, why should we care about injustice? Why should we care about our own pain or the very real suffering of others? Doesn't curiosity, pushed to its extreme, make us emotionally numb?
It is a vital philosophical concern, but the sources firmly reject that conclusion. Curiosity, when applied correctly within this framework, does not breed apathy.
Why not?
Because apathy is a state of disconnection and defense. It is the ego shutting down because the pain of caring is too high.
Okay.
Curiosity, conversely, is a state of deep, vulnerable, active engagement. It replaces the crippling, paralyzing anxiety of needing to control the outcome with the active wonder of discovering what happens next.
So it isn't about not caring. It is about shifting what you care about. You care deeply, intensely about the process of the game, rather than obsessing over manipulating the outcome.
Precisely. And furthermore, the sources elevate curiosity to the level of a profound spiritual practice.
When you operate with curiosity, when you lean into the unknown rather than running from it, you are actively participating in the very reason the universe manifested this reality.
It is an act of ultimate devotion. You realize you are not a human being trying desperately to have a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being, the universe itself having a very messy, very human experience.
Let's ground this lofty philosophy in some hard neuroscience, though. I want to dive into the determinism versus free will debate, because this is where the idea of glitching the simulation goes from a cool metaphor to empirical science.
Okay, let's do it.
If our biology, our childhood trauma, the Lacanian other, and the highly addictive algorithms of our digital world are all predetermining our reactions, does free will actually exist in this game?
Well, the sources tackle this by citing one of the most famous and controversial experiments in the history of neuroscience, Benjamin Libet's 1983 study on human consciousness and action.
Libet hooked participants up to EEG machines to monitor their brain activity and asked them to perform a simple random action like flicking their wrist whenever they felt the urge to do so.
He was trying to pinpoint the exact millisecond a conscious choice was made.
Yes, and what he found completely shattered the scientific community's understanding of free will.
The EEG machines detected a buildup of neurological activity, which Libet called the readiness potential originating in the brain's motor cortex.
But this brain activity began several hundred milliseconds before the participant consciously registered the decision to flick their wrist.
Let me make sure I'm grasping the magnitude of that. The brain had already initiated the action before the person, the conscious self, was even aware they had made a choice.
Exactly. The conscious realization of the choice was basically just an echo of a decision the unconscious brain had already made based on its predictive algorithms.
This led many neuroscientists to conclude that free will is an illusion. We are just biological robots, acting out deterministic chemical scripts, and our consciousness is just a passenger falsely believing it is driving the car.
That is an incredibly bleak and depressing view of the game.
Yeah.
If my reactions to my partner, my career choices, and my habits are all just pre-recorded scripts executing themselves, how can I possibly play by design?
Because there is a profound loophole in the data, which Yasminn's sources highlight brilliantly.
Lebet continued his research and discovered a secondary mechanism.
While the unconscious brain initiates the urge to act, the conscious mind becomes aware of the urge about 200 milliseconds before the action is actually executed.
And in that tiny fractional window of time, consciousness has the power to veto the action.
We might not have free will to generate the impulse, but we have free won't.
Free won't. I love that. We have the power to pull the brake.
If determinism and biological conditioning love efficiency, the most logical, deeply grooved neural pathway from a trigger to a reaction, then human free will is found in inefficiency.
It is found in the pause. It is found in feeling the intense, pre-programmed urge to snap defensively at your partner because that is your childhood trauma script.
But utilizing that 200 millisecond window to pull the brake, glitch the system, and choose silence instead, that microscopic pause is where all human freedom lives.
That is phenomenal. The host in the source material talks about this practically, suggesting we do completely random things in our daily lives just to exercise that veto power.
Taking a completely different route home from work, ordering a coffee you've never tried, making an unexpected choice in a conversation.
It intentionally breaks the predictive algorithm of both the digital world that is tracking you and your own nervous system that is trying to automate you.
You are manually introducing entropy into a closed system. And even if we can see that we do not have control over the major external plot points of our lives, the macro-level chaos, the recessions, the illnesses, we retain absolute control over what the sources call free interpretation.
We control the meaning. We control the soundtrack of the game.
The Stoics base their entire philosophy on this singular truth. You do not control the external events, but you have absolute, unyielding dominion over the meaning you assign to those events.
You are the sole author who decides if a painful loss is the tragic end of your story or the necessary inciting incident of a completely new adventure.
There is a line from the source material that perfectly encapsulates the danger of misusing this interpretive power. Worrying is worshiping the problem.
That line stopped me in my tracks.
It is brilliant. Attention is the currency of the game. When we worry, we are taking our life force, our magical reality-shaping attention, and we are obsessively pouring it into the exact future we do not want to manifest.
If Dispenza's theory holds true, that our attention and internal state shape our reality, then worry is actively constructing our own prison.
Curiosity is the tool we use to redirect that immense power of attention away from the problem and toward infinite possibility.
And that, ultimately, is how you successfully transition from playing by default to playing by design. You stop letting the other, the culture, the algorithms, the unresolved trauma of your ancestors dictate where your attention goes.
You reclaim the controller. You treat your life not as a prison sentence to be endured, but as a sacred cosmic experiment.
So if we look at the totality of this framework, we have journeyed from the painful unconscious loop of repetition compulsion through the brutal mechanics of shedding our false identities, all the way out to the cosmic playground of the universe exploring itself.
Which brings us to the most important question for you, the listener, right now as we move into our outro. What does this actually mean for your life today?
The unified conclusion of all these disparate sources is a radical, foundational redefinition of success. In the game of life, the metric of success is not the final destination.
The system does not care about your bank account. It does not care about your societal status, or if you achieve the perfect conflict-free relationship.
The singular true metric of success in this system is evolution.
Are you more aware today than you were yesterday? Did you manage to extract a lesson from the friction you experienced this week?
Did you pull the brake in that 200 millisecond window and make a different choice? If the answer is yes, then regardless of what the external shadows on the cave wall look like, you are winning the game.
We want to leave you with a direct, practical challenge. Think about the biggest stressor in your life right now.
Think about the obstacle that is keeping you awake, the situation that is causing you the most acute anxiety.
Instead of bracing against it, instead of wishing it would magically disappear, apply the mindset of the curious scientist.
Ask yourself, how can I play with this? How can I find the hidden mechanics, or at least the lesson, coded into this exact moment.
And to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go back to your day.
If this entire game of life was truly created by the universe, simply to explore its own infinite possibilities, what happens to the rules of your specific reality when you completely stop trying to win, and instead dedicate your life entirely to discovering what you haven't seen yet?
What if you realize you aren't stuck fighting the same terrifying boss at all? You're just finally learning how to dance with it.
Just to see what happens.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious.